Have you ever looked at a Pokemon's typing and thought to yourself, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense? Lugia's not a water type, but it's literally the guardian of the sea. You're telling me Charizard isn't a dragon type, but Mega Ampharos is? How does that make any sense? Well, I've definitely thought that, so I decided to take it upon myself to go through every single Pokemon and pick out over 100 that I think have incorrect typings. Now, before I get into all the different Pokemon and the changes I've made, I want to actually explain what I mean by an incorrect typing and how I would go about improving that, because it's not as simple as just looking at a Pokemon and saying, boom, now they're a rock type. I actually wanted to have some reasoning behind it. And after going through my list of Pokemon that I thought either had incorrect typings or had room for improvement, I essentially came to 4 main reasons on why I would change a Pokemon's typing. The first and most obvious reason is that their current typing doesn't make sense, or a new typing just makes more. And this could be either because of its general design or its in-game lore. For example, Florges is made of literal flowers, yet it is a pure fairy type and not a grass fairy type like every other plant-based Pokemon. That doesn't make any sense to me. The second reason I would change a Pokemon's typing is for the sake of consistency. Maybe this Pokemon is part of a pair and its counterpart has a dual typing, yet it does not. That's inconsistent. Or maybe it's part of an evolutionary line. For example, how come Starmie is a water psychic type, yet Staryu is pure water? This is never explained. So why not just make them both water psychic? The third reason is that this Pokemon is a dual type, yet one of their typings is completely pointless. For example, Rhyhorn is a rock ground type Pokemon from Generation 1, yet every single other ground type Pokemon has something to do with either living underground or in caves, and Rhyhorn does not. It lives in the Safari Zone, therefore make it a pure rock type Pokemon. And the fourth, and by far most important reason I would ever change a Pokemon's typing is it would be really cool. Yeah, it would be sick. This is better. This is objectively just really cool. With all of that being said, let's get into the over 100 Pokemon who I thought had a typing that could be improved, starting, fittingly, with the starter Pokemon, because I do think there's a lot of room for improvement in some of these. As I said earlier, I'm in favor of making the entire Charizard line fire and dragon typing, because that just makes sense. They're literal lizards and fire-breathing dragons. But this creates an imbalance, because now the entire Venusaur line is a dual typing, being grass poison, and now the entire Charizard line is fire dragon, which sort of gives the Squirtle line the complete shaft. So I propose, for the sake of consistency, we make Blastoise and all of their predecessors water and rock type. And I know what a lot of you may be thinking, that water steel fits them so much better because after all, they are strapped. But you also have to remember that steel type did not exist in Generation 1, no matter what Magnemite might try to tell you. In a similar sense, I think it's crazy that in the Generation 3 starters, both Swampert and Blaziken get to be dual typing, but Sceptile just doesn't. Nintendo hates grass starters. I'm convinced Sprigatito is the first grass type Pokemon that they've actually liked. Anyway, for the sake of consistency, I propose that we make Sceptile and Grovyle grass dragon types. They could also be steel types. I would be fine with that too. Really quick, all 3 Sinnoh starters are perfect and have great dual typings, but I do think it's weird that Monferno gets their dual typing first at its second stage, so let's just make Prinplup a water steel type and Grotle a grass ground type. Also, why are Rowlet and Dartrix grass flying types when Decidueye is grass and ghost? I think this just falls under the mentality that every single bird Pokemon should also be a flying type, which personally I'm not a huge fan of. I'm just gonna make them monograss types. And finally, let's talk about the Unova starter trio, who I personally think are the starter Pokemon with the most missed potential. Just like with the other imbalanced trios, I'm going to aim to give both Serperior and Samurott dual typings, but I also think that we should change Emboar's typing, because do we really need another fire fighting Pokemon? I don't think so. So purely because I think it's cooler, I'm going to move that we make both Pignite and Emboar fire ground types, Duwat and Samurott water fighting types, and Servine and Serperior grass and normal types. I think those are the typings that fit them the best, and I think they're really unique for starter Pokemon. Now that we've gotten all of those out of the way, we can finally start talking about some of the Pokemon whose typings just never made sense in the first place. And some of these are obvious, like Gyarados evolving into a water flying type instead of a water dragon type. The literal legend it's based on is about a koi who turns into a dragon, not a bird. Both Psyduck and Golduck should be water psychic instead of pure water. I swear, this is like a Mandela effect or something. I deadass thought Golduck was water psychic. Its pre-evolution is named Psyduck. I also think that Noctowl should have been a flying psychic type. Hypnosis is its signature move, and it learns a bunch of psychic type attacks. Why is it a normal type? That doesn't make any sense to me. I think both Chansey and Blissey fit the fairy typing much more than normal typing. There is nothing normal or regular about working in healthcare. They're doing an objectively good thing. In a similar sense, Audino should be normal fairy just to separate them a bit. And this might be a hot take, but I'm a huge fan of Flygon being a dragon and ground type. I think it's really fitting. However, I don't think it fits Vibrava. I think both Vibrava and Trapinch should be ground bug types and eventually turn into a dragon. I'm also a big believer in vibes. You know, sometimes a Pokemon just gives off a vibe that feels like a certain typing. Lediba and Ledian don't feel like bug flying types, they much more feel like bug normal types, especially with Comet Punch being their signature move. In a similar sense, both Runaricus and Cursola should be rock and ghost type instead of ghost and ground and just mono ghost respectively. Seriously, not a single ghost and rock type Pokemon exists, and both of these two got snubbed? And while we're on the topic of vibes, let's knock a couple Pokemon just out of the park. Dunsparce feels like a normal ground type. Gligar feels like a ground and poison type. And Torkoal should be fire and rock type. I literally found out that they were pure fire last week and not fire rock, and now I'm upset. All three of those Pokemon just fit their new typings way too well for it not to be true. Now let's talk about a bunch of Pokemon who I think have inconsistent evolution lines. And this is the part where I think I might get a lot of pushback. Having a Pokemon evolve into a new typing is objectively cool and it feels like a huge experience, but it's also better when it makes sense. The story of Bagon dreaming of flying, evolving into a Shelgon, and then a Salamence finally getting its wings and thus the flying type is awesome. I love that and I would never take that away. But then you have Pokemon like Hatterene, who are a psychic fairy type, versus Hatenna and Hatchrim, who are just pure psychic type. Is Hatterene more fairy than the other two? No, I don't think so. In that same sense, both Seal and Shelder should be water ice just like their evolutions. Staryu should be water psychic like Starmie. Also Larvitar and Pupitar, who I always thought were rock and dark types like Tyranitar, but are in fact just another rock and ground type. Let's fix that. I think Masquerain is much more interesting as a bug water type like its pre-evolution Surskit than just being the 1000th bug and flying type. I also don't really see a reason why Azurill should be a normal fairy type instead of water fairy, especially since it's always seen floating in the wild. And also, why is Drapion bug and dark? I never got that. What makes it more evil than Skorupi? Just keep it as bug poison. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. And finally, Cacnea, Drillbur, Nimble, Capsicate, and Palmy should all switch to be the same typings as their evolutions. I mean, come on, Palmy and Palmot are literally like the same design. Now, at the beginning of this video, I said one of my 4 reasons for changing a Pokemon's typing was because one of their typings felt pointless, like the Rhyhorn line being a ground type for some reason instead of just mono rock, or Mega Ampharos being a dragon type for Arceus knows what reason. This doesn't look like a dragon. But in actuality, I had a very specific type of Pokemon when I said that. Flying Pokemon. Now, I don't understand why the Pokemon Company felt the need to slap the normal typing onto almost every single bird they see, but they sure did, and it's pointless 90% of the time. Did you know we didn't get a pure flying Pokemon, a flying type with no other secondary typing, until Generation 5 with Tornadus, and we didn't see another until the Galar region? There's no reason for that. Now, don't get me wrong, there are plenty of Pokemon like Dodrio and Unfezant who I look at and think to myself, God damn, that's a normal ass bird. But for what reason are they Starly line, Farfetch, Toucanon, Rufflet, Braviary, and Chatot all normal flying? Just make them pure flying types. It's that easy, except Staraptor. Staraptor should be flying fighting because they're very cool. But that's not the end of my confusion with this typing, because whenever I ask people what makes a flying type Pokemon flying type, they always say, oh, cause it flies. But there are plenty of Pokemon that levitate or fly without the flying type. Okay, so it's just any bird Pokemon. But it's not, because there are plenty of bird Pokemon that aren't flying type, and there's also Meteor. Meteor broke me. Meteor is a rock flying type. It has no wings, it is not a bird, and it seemingly levitates. Meteor? Minior breaks my brain. We're making it a rock type and I don't understand. I think Politoed should be a water normal type because it's a funky little fella. Now I'm going to talk about the Pokemon who are based on certain objects or animals, but their typing doesn't reflect that. Pinetoe is based off a Pinecone, but it's not a grass type, it's a bug type. Lurantis is based on a Mantis, but it's not a bug type, it's a grass type. What's the deal? The Gothitelle line are based off goth people, which is all fine and dandy, but they're not dark types. Just make them psychic dark and let's move on before I start to get weird comments. Remoraid and Octillery are based off firearms, yet they're not water fire types, which is a shame because the only actual water fire type we have looks like it was based on a dog's chew toy. As I mentioned, the Florges line are based off flowers, yet they're not grass types, they're pure fairy. Crabrawler is not a water type despite being a crab. And speaking of water types, what's the deal with Graplocked being a pure fighting type? When I played Pokemon Sword and Shield, you get to the water section and this boy chases you down with a purpose, like you just insulted his family and he swims through the water. He's not a water type. He's an octopus, but he's not a water type. Now the final section before we talk about legendary Pokemon whose typings I think I should change are the Pokemon who I think could be made cooler with a different typing. Now this is probably the most vague and broad reasoning I've provided because you could look at Pikachu and just say, oh, Pikachu would be so much cooler if they were Electric Fairy or Electric Dragon, but that's not really a great reasoning. I think you just like those typings. What I'm saying is that there could be multiple reasons to make a Pokemon objectively cooler. For example, maybe they fit a typing that doesn't yet exist in the games, like turning Sneasler into an ice poison type. That would be really cool. Or it could be a combination that we already have so much of. We have so many bug and flying types, why not let Yanmega be a bug dragon? There also might be another Pokemon that is currently way too similar both in design and typing, so a change in typing could help separate them. For example, I would make Bouffalant a normal electric type to more separate them from Cantonian Tauros. Look at that frizzy hair, tell me there's not a ton of static electricity in that. I also think this can apply to a lot of Pokemon who are considered pairs. For example, why not make Solrock a fire rock type instead of another psychic rock like Lunatone? How come Oranguru gets to be a dual typing while Passimian doesn't? Just make them fighting dark and move on. And why not make Lycanroc Midnight a dark rock type? Because I'm pretty sure they've murdered someone. There is no doubt in my mind. There's also some Pokemon I would put under the category of lame, stinky Pokemon that nobody really likes, and a new typing could invigorate them and make them just a slightly bit cooler. Make Aeroscuda and Barrascuda water dark types instead of mono water. And also make Volbeat a bug electric type and make Illumise a bug fairy type. That would make them infinitely more neater and add a bit of personality to what are otherwise very forgettable Pokemon. And finally, let's talk about the Conkeldurr line, because I actually have a crazy cool idea for this. Now, design-wise, clearly these Pokemon are meant to be based off like construction workers. Timburr has this little log, Girder has this huge girder, and Conkeldurr has two pillars of concrete, and it's sick. They get stronger and change as they grow up. But why not have the typings reflect that? Make Timburr a fighting grass type, make Girder a fighting steel type, and make Conkeldurr a fighting rock type. This has no other purpose than just being a really cool evolutionary family, and also it separates them from just being Unova Machamp. But finally, that brings us to changing the typings of legendary Pokemon, the big daddies of the Pokemon franchise. Now, despite the deep lore that so many of these Pokemon have, and the thought put into their design and marketability, I still think there are a couple whoopsies that sort of happened along the way. I've already mentioned that Lugia should be a psychic water type because duh, they're the guardians of the sea. But I think the opposite is true of Palkia, who is made a water dragon type for reasons I cannot comprehend. I've had so many people try and justify why Palkia is a water dragon type, and none of them are good. Oh, they represent the vastness of space. That's dumb. Oh, the three Pokemon represent the three states of matter: liquid, solid, gas. Ghost Pokemon aren't gas. Oh, but it's Pokemon Pearl. Okay, well then why isn't Dialga a rock type like a diamond and Giratina a steel type like platinum? It doesn't make any sense, and I'm getting frustrated just talking about it. Make them a psychic dragon and move on. I also don't understand why both Celebi and Jirachi are still psychic types. I think they fit the fairy typing much better. My personal theory is that when Gen 6 came out and Nintendo went back in time to change a lot of Pokemon's typings, they were too cautious to go back and retcon any legendary Pokemon typings because they're much more iconic. But it's okay, Nintendo. I'm giving you permission. You can make them fairy types, and you know what? Throw in Manaphy as well. Also, can someone explain to me why Calyrex is a grass type? I just found this out. I think in lore there's supposed to be another guardian of the forest, and it's not like we had too many of those already. I say just make them a pure psychic type. Like, you would never guess grass type based on their design, and we're gonna stick them on a horse anyways in 5 minutes. What's the point? And in that same vein, you just couldn't resist making Ultra Necrozma a dragon type, right? This is supposed to be Necrozma, a pure psychic type after they fully absorb Solgaleo, a steel type, and Lunala, a ghost type. Where did dragon come from, Game Freak? Not every major legendary needs to be a dragon. Just make them a pure psychic type and move on with your day. And that brings us to our final 2 Pokemon. And this might make some people upset. Kyogre and Groudon. Now, before all of the Generation 3 Hoenn fans get mad at me, hear me out. On paper, Kyogre and Groudon's typings fit perfectly. Groudon is the guardian of the land, so he's a ground type. Kyogre is the guardian of the sea, so they're a water type. That's awesome. Except there is a huge imbalance because Kyogre is just objectively better than Groudon because of their type advantage. And you may be thinking, but Moop, this is unfair. You made Lugia a psychic water type, which gives them type advantage over Ho-Oh. And yes, that's true, but Ho-Oh also gets stab flying moves to sort of fight back against Lugia. Groudon doesn't. So here's my proposition to still fit in with the lore. Make Kyogre a water and ice type since icebergs exist in the ocean too. And then make Groudon a ground and grass type since grass is on land. Plants are on land too. Ground doesn't just mean volcanoes. Yes, Kyogre's ice type would give them 4 times effective stab moves against Groudon, but at the very least Groudon gets stab solar beams to fight back. It's not perfect, but I definitely think it's an improvement and a teensy bit cooler. And this also would mean that both Kyogre and Groudon are dual types just like Big Daddy Rayquaza. But that's my list. These are the over 100 Pokemon whose typings I would change. Please let me know in the comments below what terrible opinions I have, or let me know what Pokemon I might have missed. This is a new type of video, but I had a lot of fun making it. Let me know if you want to see more of this, and have a nice damn rest of your day.